If you're a mom who's ready to start budgeting, but you're wondering, how do I set up a realistic budget? Well, today we're going to be talking about exactly where to start, but it's probably not where you think. So, when I first started budgeting, I tried to sit down and create my first budget. I mapped it all out on paper. I was so proud of myself. And then I was actually working through my budget over the next month, and I was like, these are amounts are so totally wrong. And so, today I want to save you from all of that time and frustration, and we're going to go ahead and start with gathering your bank statement. Now, if you also have credit cards or several, you'll want to identify those as well, because we're going to go through each of them transaction by transaction and identify how much you have been spending and classify each of those expenses. Now, if you're like, "Ugh, that sounds like so much work, couldn't AI do this for me?" Absolutely. You can go ahead and take your bank statements and upload them into AI and say, "Hey, classify these transactions for me." Or maybe you're just not into doing those steps and using AI in that manner. I have a list of different categories that we want to identify how much you're spending in. Now, if you are the person that you want this pen and paper, I will provide a link for you down in the details below. I would recommend, as you go through your bank statements and your credit card statements, don't try to pick out these categories, but instead go line by line. But I am going to go through the list of categories, so that way you can just kind of be prepared and mentally be thinking about, how might I want to classify this transaction? So the first thing is giving. So if you're someone that is a priority in your life, and that's like one of the top financial actions that you take at the beginning of every month or paycheck, that's going to be the first item. Now, if that is not a priority for you and you're just like, why is that the first thing on her list? I will say it's a lot easier to delete a row from a spreadsheet if that's not a priority for you than it is to go ahead and add it back in and update all of the formatting. So that's why I've added it first in this spreadsheet, because this spreadsheet mirrors our budgeting spreadsheet that we're going to use in the next step. So if that's not a value that you have, then let's move on to the next one, which is saving. So you may be transferring money from your checking account into your savings account. We're not going to be classifying that as savings for today's steps. But we do want to classify any external payments that are going out of your bank account that may be going to retirement or towards a college savings plan for your child. If you don't have any of those, that's okay. Let's move on to the next step. Next is debt. So any credit cards, any student loans, or any extra mortgage payments that you're making, anything else that you would classify as debt, we're going to list that down. Now, if you have more than one transaction for each of these categories, you're not necessarily trying to total them up just yet. You're just trying to identify them on the sheet with how much you're spending in each transaction you're making. So if you have to put, let's say you have two payments of a credit card per month, you're going to list those out twice, and at the end, we will total these all together to get a good idea for our total complete month budget. Now, the other things that we are going to go through real quickly are going to be rent. Now, if you don't have rent, you might have a mortgage payment, as well as any maintenance or improvement projects that you're doing. Now, if you're doing like a big, renovation or something like that, then you're probably not going to put that under maintenance. Maintenance are more like the day-to-day things that you're doing to take care of your home and make sure it's in good working order. The other thing that we're going to include is utilities. So like electricity, gas, or propane, any cell phone, internet bills, trash, water or sewer or septic. Depending on where you live, you may have, different types of utility bills for these, and we want to identify where or how much we're spending for each. Next is going to be food. Now, in the food category, I'm just talking about groceries. We're not including restaurants. We're not including door dashing. We're not including any takeout, none of that. Food is simply groceries. We're going to kind of come back around to takeout and restaurants here in a second. Next, we have transportation. So that includes gas for your vehicles. If you do take public transit or anything like that, you could put that in this instead of gas, because obviously you're not refilling up a car or anything like that. Now, if you have a vehicle, you're also going to include registration, taxes, or licenses, which this doesn't typically come around every month, but if you happen to have them this month, we do want to classify them, and any vehicle maintenance or repairs. Next, we have childcare. So my moms out there will definitely know that how important and large this is going to be. You probably already feel this in your day-to-day budget. We're also going to capture any clothing. Now, with clothing, with a lot of some of these categories that we're going to go into here next, is you might not necessarily know how much you're spending on these categories, because let's say you shop at the same store and you get groceries there and you get diapers there and you get clothing there and you get lots of other things there for your pets, etc. So if you don't know or how to classify them, that's okay. We're just going to take our best guess. And if you're like, well, I think most of the month I buy, half of this is probably groceries and the other half, is household expenses. We're not getting super nitty gritty particular in this step. We're just trying to get a broad baseline. So then when we do go to set up our budget, it's not so completely off that we're just like starting from raw numbers. We have something to work off of. And then we will actually hone that budget as we go through this kind of workshop together. So hopefully that also helps with some of these other categories as well. Next is insurance. So this is going to cover life insurance, medical insurance, dental insurance, home insurance, if you have this outside of your like rent or mortgage escrow account. Then we have auto insurance, disability insurance, ID insurance, and long-term care insurance. Now, you may not have all of these different insurance types, but you may have several, or you might only pay these like once a quarter or once every 6 months, or sometimes even annually, or some of these insurance types might be built in that you kind of pay through your employer. So if you pay through your employer, don't worry about them. We're going to classify and gather that information in a different part. We're just looking at what is hitting your bank statement. But if you are paying some of these more on an annual or semi-annual basis, if you are capturing that information at this step in our process, you're going to want to identify like when the next premium payment is due. All right, so next we have medical and health. Now, this is not insurance, right? We just already captured any medical insurance that you're paying. This is more like gym membership, any out-of-pocket bills that you're paying, any vitamins, supplements, nutrients, anything like that you're doing outside of just your medical insurance. So again, if some of these vitamins and supplements, you're buying on Amazon, but you're also buying lots of other things on Amazon, if you want to be an A+ student, you can go back and look at some of those receipts. You can pull up some of your, transaction history. But if you're just trying to get through the process and that seems way too overwhelming or difficult for you, that's okay. You don't have to do it at this point in time. Now we're getting down into the personal category. So here, for any of my moms that have kids in school, you're going to identify any school expenses that you had. You might also have certain gifts or data subscriptions, like for your photos or anything like that. Any household items, so paper towels and toilet paper and hair conditioner and stuff like that. Any pet expenses that you have. And then I also have a separate category in there as well for any miscellaneous or other things that may have popped up that we haven't captured in any of these previous categories. At the very end is going to be recreational. So think of this as purely fun. Most typical things that you're going to find in this category are going to be entertainment subscriptions, any like pocket or fun money that you or your spouse have spent, any restaurants or takeout is going to go in this category as well. If you go on vacation or you do a lot of traveling, those things are also going to kind of filter into this category, but most likely you may not be, taking a vacation every single month. So if you, happen to be and this is the month that you're taking vacation, then maybe this might be a better time for you to like look at a previous month where it was more regular to what your spending is, but we'll still use that information for creating a realistic budget when we get to that next step. Now, as you work through this exercise, if you run into any questions and you would like to meet with me personally as well as other moms, we are meeting on a monthly basis. It's more like an office hours, come when you want, stay as long as you can. We'll meet for an hour, ask a question, or just kind of hang out. I'll leave the details for you down below where you can connect with us. So now that you have classified all of your transactions, this might be a helpful layer that you can get AI to do on your behalf to say like, okay, when am I mostly spending frivolous money? Like, is it that you're spending a lot of money on the weekends? You might go a really long time not spending any money, and then you have like 1 week where you are just frivolously spending money left and right. So using this time frame to really evaluate, okay, are there certain patterns for me to be really mindful and strategic going into creating my budget for me to know about based off of my previous behavior? Another thing that you might also realize or identify is like, like, wow, you're dropping a lot of money at certain stores. Now, if that's not connected to, okay, well, you're buying several categories at these specific stores, like, your typical department store where you have like 4 or 5 different things that you're buying there, but if it's that you're walking into a clothing store and you're spending almost the equivalent of what you would buy at a department store that's groceries and, household items, but you're spending it on clothing, that's something to kind of keep in mind and evaluate and just like kind of give yourself a mental check of, is that really realistic? That might be an issue or a problem as we go to actually creating a more strategic budget. Here are some common questions that you may actually experience while you're going through this whole process. One of them is, how do you categorize some of your expenses? Like, do groceries and diapers go in the same category? No, they do not. So I would put the diapers in that household category. I would put it in with my household expenses, or I would create a completely separate category for diapers. And again, when you're looking at your bank transaction or your credit card statement, they're just going to be the totals, right? They're not going to list out exactly how you spent all of that money. Again, that's okay. We're not necessarily looking into that granular of a detail just yet. We're just using this as a baseline, as a frame point to create a budget moving forward. Another thing that you might also want to think about at this point is evaluating, okay, what was a want purchase versus a need purchase? Those need purchases are going to be obviously things like rent, gas or transportation, insurance, utilities. Clothing can be a need purchase, but a lot of people actually end up taking what is a need and then they inflate that into spending a lot more than what the baseline need is, and then it ends up being a want. So identifying, okay, when you're going through your transactions too, to say like, what is a need versus what is a want, and how often are you using your purchasing power on wants instead of needs? One thing that you could do is you could put a little check mark to each, or maybe you want to highlight what your actual wants were, or the things that you think were wants versus needs, and then see how that compares to the things that are not highlighted, and see also, what is that showing you about your spending behavior? Are you spending a lot on those wants when they're really not needs? And how much of that purchasing amount did you spend on all of those wants? Another question that may be helpful is, what if you sometimes use cash? So if you use cash on a semi or fairly semi-regular basis, and you know in general how much that may be, go ahead and add the cash into this list, because what we're wanting to do is we're wanting to just like get a ballpark baseline range of what you're spending. And again, that we're not going down to the penny. We're not trying to capture every single thing. You're not failing if you've missed a transaction somewhere. But if you're like, okay, I know on a general basis that I spend $50 in cash on this activity, or, a month, or my husband gets, $100 of fun money and he goes out with his guy friends and, they hang out and that's just what he does every month. Write that down and categorize that as well. Since we're using this exercise to also evaluate our own money behavior, one of the things that we also want to ask ourselves is, did this spending actually reflect what my priorities are, what my financial goals are? Is my money reflecting my values? Because where your money is being spent is actually a reflection of your values, whether or not you're being intentional about it or not. So if your money and your spending habits are saying something that's contrary to what you have personally decided, or you and your family have decided is a reflection of your values, then this is a great time for you to also identify and say, like, is this a true representation of what our values are? And if not, this is the time that we're going to go ahead and modify that behavior when you set up your budget, so it can much better reflect where your values are. Sometimes we have this really big desire to do certain things or spend our money in certain ways because those values and principles are really near and dear to our hearts. But when we want to do something, we don't have the funds to be able to actually contribute to certain things. And then we feel disappointed that we can't contribute to certain causes that we're interested in. Well, it's not because we couldn't, it's just because that we have unwisely spent our money in other ways. And then it ends up being a really disappointing situation for us, because it can just end up reflecting our own selfishness, when it's not really that we're trying to be selfish, but if we're a little bit more intentional about how we spend our money, then we can reflect our values in a much better way of living out our life to actually be a bigger impact on the things that we personally desire and hold dear to our hearts. Once you get to the end of your bank statement and your credit card history, then you're done. But now it's your turn. If you have any questions, we can continue this conversation in the comments, or if you're looking for the next step to do as part of creating your budget, I will link up that episode for you once it's available so you can watch that next. Gotta wait for my dog. She's barking.